So Howard, congratulations on receiving the ASPN 2024 Distinguished Service Award. You have dedicated a significant portion of your career to the field of brachial plexus surgery in pediatrics, as well as to the ASPN. Can I ask you who or what inspired you on this path?
The interesting part of that is that in general I was interested in hand surgery and nerve surgery when I went into plastic surgery. That seemed natural enough. But the very specific interest in brachial plexus surgery came from our physiotherapy team. It wasn't something I'd studied, it's not something I'd learned, but the physiotherapist at Sick Kids Hospital came to Ron Zucker and myself fairly early on, when I'd only just been there for a couple of years, and explained that there were a bunch of kids with brachial plexus problems, babies with brachial plexus problems, being sent to the physiotherapy department to make them better. And of course, physiotherapy can't make them better. It can keep them from getting stiff, but it can't make them better. And at that time, there was a surgeon coming in from outside, one of the neurosurgeons, to do the occasional surgical case, but there wasn't a program and there wasn't any active surgery really for these kids. And they thought, why don't you try this? You're doing hand surgery, you're doing nerve surgery. So Ron Zucker and I together got Grant's anatomy book out and stood it on a stand in the operating room and started operating on these kids. I'm not suggesting anybody should do this as a way forward, but in those days, there wasn't anybody around us to learn from, so we made it up from scratch, and then just went from there. But interestingly, if there's a point, it's that the ideas for what you should be doing won't necessarily come from within or from yourself, and they may come from totally unrelated members of the team you don't think of as the source of that kind of information.
And since then, you've published, some profound articles in this field, and all of us who are in the field of brachial plexus surgery in pediatrics know them. But what do you feel is your most significant contributions to the field of nerve surgery?
In my view, it's actually following the data. So, and collecting the data in a robust way, and preserving it and analyzing it in a robust way. With so many things in medicine and surgery in particular, people decide after the fact that let's go off and figure out what we did. And that only answers so many questions. So if you develop validated methods for measurement that work in the population you want, if you start collecting that data prospectively, even not knowing what you might want to know in the future, and then apply rigorous analysis to that, the way you would for a basic science experiment, then you can produce data and information that's actually robust going forward and can be very helpful. So it's taking it away from I do this and I think this and this works for me into the here's what the data shows, and follow the data.
Yes, you've told me that a lot over the over the many years we've been working together. So going back to when you were first starting out, who was your biggest role model in nerve surgery?
Well, in fact, Ron was my big role model because he was right there to hand, and it was so easy to get him to come in and what do you think of this or what do you think of that? For other cases other than just brachial plexus surgery. So he was a very strong role model.
And the ASPN started out around that time in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
How did you become involved in the organization, and what role do you feel like it had in your career development?
Well, it's interesting, as many people know, the ASPN started off as a splinter of the Plastic Surgery Research Council because some people felt they weren't getting enough platform at the Research Council. And so let's make our own platform and just have only nerve things. And I went to the very early meetings, and I thought it was very interesting, started going. And what's interesting is that fairly shortly thereafter, a membership position for the membership at large, which is one of the early positions in the association, came up for nomination, and there was somebody being suggested that wasn't necessarily a favorite of the rest of the people in the room, and it was not even in the room at the time the nominations were being suggested. And so Alan Bellsberg poked me in the ribs and say, why don't we nominate you? So it was not planned, it was not a forethought thing, but once I got involved, I just was interested and kept going from there.
I think the people is really what makes ASPN, because we're all like-minded people who are very invested in nerve surgery. And then you went on to become president in 2009, 2010. Why was it important to you to get involved in the leadership of ASPN?
the one person can only do so much in their career or their lifetime. So if you want to make a bigger impact, you've got to leave something behind. You've got to find people who can do what you do even better, and you've got to bring them forward and help them make progress along the way. And there are many ways of doing this through teaching at a university, but also some of these larger organizations, particularly the ones that have a nice focus and everybody knows why they're there, is a great way to help people, help promote people and move them forward.
I think for me, one of the best parts of that meeting is that you get the basic scientists and people of different surgical backgrounds, from neurosurgery, plastic surgery, orthopedic surgery, who all have different views and from their own learnings and teachings in nerve surgery. So what do you see as the future of ASPN?
I think that's actually the most important part. And I think one of the things that we see a little less of now at ASPN than we used to is the basic science component. So I think we should actually be actively trying to find out who those people are and getting them involved, because it's a wonderful dynamic between the basic scientists and the clinicians. And they often come up with the ideas that we won't think of. I mean, don't ever worry about where you got your ideas. So that's what I would do if I could rally that kind of interest from the basic scientists.
It's also a very social meeting where we get to see a lot of our friends. Do you have a fondest memory of being at this meeting, or one particular meeting that shone for you?
That's really tough. Which is your favorite child question?
Yes.
So one thing that was really fun was the year I was president. It was not actually a very happy year to be president, because we were going through the fuss where the ASPS had aggressively come to us and said, we're going to run your meeting for you. We're going to do it better than anybody else ever done it. And we accepted that proposal. And then a couple of months before the meeting, they bailed on us. And we didn't have the ASPS. So here we were ready to have a big meeting with no organizational support. We cobbled it all together. We fixed it all. We had the meeting. The meeting was all right. And so one night during that meeting, a bunch of my buddies went out for dinner with me. The restaurant in Boca Raton was freezing because it was cold in Florida, even though it was November, February, January, probably January. So we went up to the suite. They gave me this huge suite for being president, which I didn't need, but guess what? We all loaded into the suite. There was a big table. We all had ordered dinner from room service and had a lovely time. And by then I knew everything was going to be okay. That the meeting would, even with all the trouble we'd had, the meeting would be fine.
There's been a number of hurdles, not just COVID, right, over the years. So what advice would you give to the next generation of peripheral nerve surgeons?
I think the best advice I can give them is to keep your eyes open. Don't be dogmatic. If you do research, if you study what you're doing with nerve surgery of any kind, then when you produce the result, produce the data, then follow your own data. If you say that something is the right thing to do in this situation, you'd better be the person who does it, and not just suddenly shift off and go on some other tangent until you can identify where that newer and better tangent may be.
Sound advice for all of us. Okay, so one of my last questions is that's more specific to our field of brachial plexus birth injury. What do you think is the next major milestone to improve the care for children with this condition?
That's a tough question. You know what my first answer is likely to be already, is that from my point of view, the big underexplored area is pain and the consequences of pain in these children. And you're starting to work on that, and other people are starting to recognize that, even getting us past the point where some of the senior people would even admit that that existed was a hurdle. I think we've made that jump. I think now people understand it's a problem, but there's a long way to go there before we have a better understanding of it, and therefore better treatment modalities for it, and better understanding what to do about it.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Obviously, I'm very interested, and then also the basic science of how we can just improve nerve regeneration.
Yes,
particularly
that of course, which is why we need to get more basic scientists in our group and help them in any way we can, as well as having them help us.
Well, congratulations again on this well-deserved award.
Thank you. Thank you very much.